Hey, it's your boy Max here with another basic white guy socioeconomic mansplainer video that no one asked for.
UNFTR.
The word of the day today, kids, is neoliberalism. Can you say it with me? Neoliberalism. Good! Neoliberalism is a word that took years to enter the mainstream, and it means different things to different people. And because we refer to it so often on UNFTR, and it is arguably the dominant ideology of the right wing over the past 50 years, I thought it worth a moment of our time. The first thing to know is that neoliberalism, at its core, is an economic theory. Economists from the Chicago School of Economics were of the belief that the United States in particular, though not exclusively, had developed too many interventionist policies that would both corrupt and constrict the global economy. So they worked over many years to craft an alternate vision based upon what they believed were classical liberal economic principles. Let's break down the word. First, neo, new or revived. Liberal, meaning classical or traditional. What? That's right. The first thing to understand about the economists behind the neoliberal movement is that they consider themselves traditionalists. To them, liberal economics is rooted in the tradition of classical liberalism, or neoclassicism as defined by figures like David Ricardo or Adam Smith. And they refer to themselves as liberals, which is confusing, I know. So it's interesting. Prior to Keynes, most economists were viewed as philosophers first and foremost, or social theorists. That's mostly how Smith was viewed. Marx signified a turn, as his philosophy turned to praxis and inspired revolutions. And I would say that Keynes kind of put a bow tie on the discipline and turned it into a noble profession on its own and lifted it from purely philosophical to doctrinal. I bring this up because there are very few times in history when an economist gives life to a political doctrine. It's what made Marx such a big figure and why his work is still cited today. So I think it's critical to understand just how influential Milton Friedman was and how we're very much living in the world that he molded today. While he's not a household name like Adam Smith or Karl Marx, he has to be considered in the conversation when contemplating the most impactful theorists in modern times. If Smith is to capitalism what Marx is to socialism, then Friedman is that to neoliberalism. There are others, of course, great Chicago School mentors and colleagues of Friedman, such as Aaron Director, Frank Knight, George Stigler, Ronald Coase, Gary Becker, and more. These are the titans of economic neoliberalism that helped reshape the world. Now, at its core, neoliberalism claims to adhere to the principles of David Ricardo and Adam Smith, or at least a perverted interpretation of them. If you saw our capitalism episode, then you know that there's more than one single take on Smith. So this crew at Chicago believed in the primacy of the free markets, the presence of an invisible hand, and that rules were greater than authorities. Meaning the natural order will always work better than government intervention and regulations because there are incontrovertible, universal rules to the free market. Regulations, taxes, government interference of any kind in their estimation added costs and friction to transactions that are better left between two individual parties, and that competition and reputation of the parties would ultimately produce a fair and equitable outcome. Okay. Now, another key aspect of the economic philosophy is that loose monetary policy, printing way too much money, would always produce inflation. And inflation was, and is, considered the most evil and deleterious condition in the world to them. Now, oftentimes, the problem with theory is that it stays as theory. It's hard to test. In fact, I can and probably will make the argument that we've never really tested Marxist theory in the purest form. Adam Smith's work is wholly theoretical and completely anachronistic at this point because it was envisioned within a strict class system and an agrarian economic system. So to the point, neoliberalism has never been tested in the way that Friedman and company envisioned it. We'll talk more about that in the coming videos, but it should be noted that there was a period that Friedman especially viewed as the best representation of his theory and ergo, the best time in American economic history. The Second Industrial Revolution. Run by giant corporations, forging a new world built on determination and innovation, the turning point in the modern era responsible for all the good things that we have today. Child labor? Incidental. 80-hour workdays, 7 days a week? Necessary. Industrial pollution? Get over it. As we'll uncover shortly, neoliberal economic theory would bleed into social theories as well. And this is where it gets really tricky and interesting. See, they believe that society, left alone, just like the markets, would produce equality. That it could, end racism. That competition will provide efficient solutions to essentially anything on Earth. Ultimately, the GOP would weaponize the free market ideology in ways that even the Chicago school crew would recoil from, like overthrowing nations to pillage for cheap labor and natural resources, courtesy of bloated defense budgets and deficits that necessitated the expansion of the money supply. The neocons of the Reagan era, once seen as the perfect vessel to test the neoliberal economic theory, would weaponize free market ideology to serve their nefarious purposes. And yet, in the face of this, the neoliberal school of thought would look past the hard evidence that surrounded them and double down on their theories under the grand illusion that free markets are, well, real. Except they're not. All right, next up, a timeline of neoliberalism. Here endeth the video.